The White Sox are the hottest team in baseball after winning 9 of their past 11 games. Let's talk about these fun times on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, the White Sox have one of the best records this month and have been playing winning baseball since the All-Star break, so let's just discuss how fun these times have been. Then let's discuss if Will Venable deserves AL Manager of the Year votes. And finally, the White Sox got a huge front office win. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the app today. So the White Sox are 8-2 this month after taking 2 of 3 from the Tampa Bay Rays. And they won yesterday based on a lot of the ways that this team has gone 25-25 since the All-Star break. The rookies are leading the way. The only thing, though, that was missing in yesterday's 5-1 victory was the home run ball, because hitting home runs is another reason why the White Sox have had a great post-All-Star break record. Now, I know 500 baseball isn't considered great to most teams, but considering where this team was last September, where they were on a collision course with setting the record for futility in a season, yeah, the 25-25 seems pretty great. And the White Sox are also just scoring more runs in general in the second half because the rookies are playing much better. The talent is much better because of these rookies. And they're getting solid pitching. And that's why it's just been so much fun to watch this team in the second half. I mean, you're seeing Shane Smith return to his all-star form that he showed in April and May. You're getting that solid to great production from rookie bats in Colson Montgomery, Kyle Teal, Edgar Caro, and Chase Meidroth. And it's actually fun to turn on White Sox baseball. It doesn't seem to be a chore. It doesn't seem to be torture. Because you can watch and be like, wow, they're playing entertaining and good baseball. And think about that. At this time last year, I was talking about the 1916 Philadelphia A's and the White Sox in the same sentence. The White Sox were actually threatening to break a record set in 1916. And I know a figurative coin in the mentioning the 2024 season jar, but it just shows you the progress that has been made because you're actually accomplishing the goal of this season, and that is to develop a young core that the team can move forward with. And you just got to like that they've also cracked the code in turning things around, that where you can actually see that it's going to be turned around. Put the dang ball in the air and over the fence. You know, that was something that was definitely lacking in the roster construction last season. Too much on the run prevention because it was cheaper. But not enough premium of, hey, well, let's get some talented guys that can actually put the ball in the air. And for the guys that can't put the ball in the air, then let's at least get guys that can get on base. So when those power bats get up, they can actually, drive them in. And think about this. In terms of home runs, the White Sox are tied for 6th since the All-Star break with 75. They've also figured out how to score those runs, again, when they get those guys on the base. They are 5th in runs scored since the All-Star break with 265. The run differential from the second half is 265 to 243. In the first half, it was 332 to 430. So no wonder why the team went 32-65. And if you want to get mathematical, and I also want to share this tweet that I just saw from Elijah Evans at Elijah EVA. Chicago White Sox offense in the second half, 325 OBP, 7th in MLB, 764 OPS, 7th. 265 run 5th, as I just said, 75 or 74 home runs. I said that. 20.7% K percentage, 6th lowest, 25-25 since the All-Star break. I mean, think about that. And if you want to get mathematically technical and say, well, the second half is after game 81, well, the Sox are 31-35, which I would argue is rapid improvement from being 26-55 on June 25th after game 81. And the rivals, your division rivals, are even taking notice. This is what Tigers manager A.J. Hinch said on September 5th per Kyle Williams of the Chicago Sun-Times. Quote, "They're growing into a problem, aren't they?" Hinch said before the Sox 7-5 victory, their season-high 6th consecutive win in the series opener Friday against the Tigers. They're playing a more stabilized version of baseball, and you can see the young players growing up and growing into these roles. We've got to pitch well to beat these guys. They're never out of it, end quote. So think about that. A division-leading team is saying, we actually have to play well to beat these guys. I mean, that is a huge sign of progress, because this isn't a typical get-right team that the White Sox were in 2024 in the first half of 2025. They're fighting teams tooth and nail. They're having a say in the playoff race in terms of basically knocking out any hope the Rays had of making a late run. They pushed off the Tigers' magic number. And yesterday's win was another example of rookies leading the way and then getting that support from the veterans that they've needed. And you had Colson Montgomery once again impacting the game without needing to hit the home run ball. Opens up the scoring with a 2 RBI hit. And then Kyle Teal comes off the bench with a 2 RBI hit to put the game out of reach. And I'm sorry for this one person decided that he had to put in the short that Teal crushed. I said Teal crushed a single. Sorry that it was a bloop. Oh my gosh. The world has ended. I apologize for that. It's okay. Words do matter, but take into a context, when do the words actually matter? Okay, just saying that. Chase Meidroth, he reaches base 4 times and scores 2 runs, and Edgar Carroll contributes a hit and a run. And then you get this great outing by Shane Smith. He goes 5 2/3 innings of shutout ball, allows just 4 hits. And that's how the White Sox are getting things done lately. And that's why it's so much fun to watch, because you can have hope. You can have hope because there's not the pressure of winning actually there. There's not the pressure of expectations. Now, you could argue that's a bad thing, but at the same time, this is kind of the nice part of the rebuild when guys are producing, when the expectations are so low. When the expectations is development and you're actually seeing development, because that was the expectation, at least for me. I wanted to see a young core form, and guess what? A young core has formed. And you got to appreciate these kids then meeting the moment. Now, obviously, the next bar to clear will be, can they handle the pressure of expectations? Of the expectations to win. Now, I think the expectations to win next season should still be relatively realistic, 70 to 75 wins. That maybe if you overachieve, gets 81. Maybe you have that 1990 type season on a lower scale. But that should be the next bar is can you win more games? Can you be in this thing a little bit longer? Can you basically stretch together, 2 solid seasons and the only, 2 solid halves? And the only reason why you still end up with 75 wins is maybe just because, again, the kids are still developing certain things. They still have to refine some of the smaller stuff. And because, again, they still need some more superstar talent. I mean, that's clear as day. But so far in this 50-game sample size, these young rookies are showing that they might be able to clear that bar of expectations next season too. And in terms of a full sample size, the Sox are actually at the doorstep of possibly, winning 20 or more games from last season. And some are suggesting because of that, Will Venable should get some manager of the year votes. Let's discuss that after the break. You've probably seen a million ads for hair growth products and thought, sure, like that actually works. There are so many products out there, and it's hard to know which ones are actually going to do anything. That's why you should give Nutrafol a closer look. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1.5 million people. Again, that's 1.5 million people. And it's not just hype. This is a supplement clinically tested that targets the root causes of thinning and shedding with a proactive approach. And I have some hair issues. So you best believe I'm going to be giving Nutrafol a try, and I can feel good about giving them a try because Nutrafol is NSF certified and backed by peer-reviewed studies. See thicker, stronger hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering Locked On MLB listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com. That's Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball, venting with me, and maybe some hope. And notice I've added that to the tagline because man, we've got this thing called hope. And it's not the hope that could drive a man crazy. Like Red once said to Andy Dufresne. And it's because I think you've got a better manager. I mean, Pedro Grifol probably is one of the worst managers of all time. I'm not embellishing it. He was that bad. When people think they have all the answers and they don't, that's a sign of a terrible manager. Will Venable might actually have the answers, or at least some of the answers, because of his background and the fact that he seems like he has expectations and an idea of how to get to those expectations. But he's not going to win AL Manager of the Year just because the Sox are flirting with avoiding another 100-loss season. He's not going to get that. And I know I've had those questions and I discussed them in the offseason that everydayers might remember. But I do like how Jordan Lazowski, he tweeted out, it was just a simple tweet, that's why I'm not sharing the graphic, that Venable should receive, though, some down ballot votes for AL Manager of the Year. And I agree, but the angle that I'm taking is I see some out-of-town stupid that's going to go on. That, well, he didn't have to do much to get these teams back to basically baseball factory standards. Because that's what 60 wins are. It's baseball factory standards. Again, you're guaranteed to win 60, you're guaranteed to lose 60. It's what you do with the other 41 that matters. And say the Sox win 60 games, well, that means or the other 42, I'm sorry. That means he was 0-42, with the ones that matter. Say they go 63-99, that would be 1-41 with the games that matter. And that's why I want to go with the angle of, again, I could see him getting some down ballot votes from BBWAA writers in Chicago or even in the division markets. I could see, the Tigers writer, the Guardians writer, the Twins writers, the Royals writer saying, yeah, I mean, from where they were to where they are now, yeah, he deserves a 5th, 6th place vote. If I think it's 5 votes or whatever. Either way, down ballot, as they say. But I do see those out-of-town folks, or again, the perpetual negative writers, and they're out there. I've worked with some of them before. Now, some of them are still good people, but they're always on the perpetual negative. It's just who they are, or it's the angle that they always want to work. But I could see those negative writers going, well, things were so bad, getting back to 60 wins, that's a low bar to still clear. I mean, again, just that's a low bar to get the team back to factory settings. And I talked about it on past shows. I think I talked about it a week or a half ago. John Greenberg of The Athletic posted a tweet that, every day, as you might recall, the segment, that trying to avoid a third straight 100-loss season still speaks to how sad things are at 35th and Shields. And I think some voters are going to think that way too. That avoiding a third straight 100-loss season, that's still pretty sad. Even though us White Sox fans and guys like Kyle Williams, who I'm assuming would be a BBWAA. I know Scott Merkin, he's got to be. He's been writing for forever. Lamont Pope, those guys know the context that, no, this is actually progress being made. This wasn't like Los Angeles Angels, where the front office went and spent some money on one-year players just to kind of boost their, talent floor. The White Sox are doing, they boosted their talent floor internally They've boosted their talent ceiling internally through development, through getting trades of prospects that basically other teams just didn't have the time to develop anymore. They're doing that. But they're going to tune that out, even though he's overhauled the clubhouse culture. He's set standards, and he's actually a competent leader. And again, how do we judge that he's a competent leader? Remember, I had a couple standards I shared in a show in November that everydayers might recall, and I shared on SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. And the standards are, first, number one, Venable creates a good clubhouse culture that has a winning mentality. I think we've checked that box. That's going on right now. These guys seem to like to be around each other. They're having fun. And obviously, I just talked about in the first segment, at least since the All-Star break, 25 and 25. Check that box. Having the team prepared to play every game. I mean, they're playing cleaner baseball. There's still some errors obviously being made, but that happens in baseball. They've been running the bases obviously much better on most nights, especially now that Andrew Vaughn is gone. They're better positioned defensively. It seems like outside of maybe Luis Robert Jr., who still had struggles, I think, with a hitting plan, a lot of these guys understand what's the hit plan for each at-bat. And also, how many times are you saying the White Sox just White Sox? Barely any. They seem more prepared. They seem more disciplined at the plate. They seem to be looking for their pitches that they want to hit and drive. That type of stuff. Number three, define the brand of baseball that the team should be playing that eventually wins. And I think we're seeing it. Hit fastballs better. That was a huge thing that Will Venable was harping on. But also hit more home runs. Pitch better, although they still need to pitch better in high leverage situations. Play cleaner defense. And for the guys that aren't able to hit the home runs, or if you get down to 2 strikes, fight like heck to get on base. So then the guys that do hit home runs can drive you in. 4, players are getting, do players get better under Will Venable? I think that box has been checked pretty good. 5, being adaptable, not so dogmatic in his ways. I still think there's some growth in there in that, some lefties are getting a little too much run, whether it's a hitter like Joshua Palacios, who got way more at bats than he should have ever have gotten, or Tyler Alexander still being on this team and being used. But he has shown signs that he isn't going to be so dogmatic in his ways. For example, the Kyle Teal and Edgar Caro being in the same lineup together with one of them DHing while the other one's catching. Remember, he was so resistant at the beginning, saying, there's enough at-bats. There's enough at-bats. Well, obviously, he's changed his mind because they have been usually DHing and catching together, in the lineup together. So I like that. But I would like to, see him approach like, hey, maybe Kyle Teal should play a little bit of left field this year, especially when, again, you're still not expected to win. This is the perfect time to experiment. 6, his decisions at the very least do not cost the White Sox victories. Now, I have questioned the bullpen usage at times, but I do think if you give him more talented bullpen pitchers, especially in high leverage, I think we can get a better judgment. But for example, yesterday, after the Rays pulled their lefty starter, he inserts Kyle Teal into the game, and Teal breaks it wide open, continues his consecutive on-base streak to 20. But I see some of these voters out of the market or out of the division see this and go, well, still early in his career, and the White Sox literally had nowhere to go but up, completely ignoring, though, that you had sports books setting the line for the over-under on the win total at 49.5 at one point. And I think it rose all the way up to like 52.5. There was still not the expectation that the White Sox were going to go back to factory standards, basically. The possibility actually existed that this team could still hit the bigger bottom, and they didn't. So Venable deserves credit for that. And he deserves credit for also creating this environment that these rookies are thriving in. Well, another sign of White Sox having good leadership is assistant GM Josh Barfield, and he turned down an offer from the Orioles to join their front office. Let's discuss how that is a huge win in keeping him in the fold after the break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And I keep telling you, FanDuel's traditional money line spreads and over-unders are fun to play. But if you want to win it big, or at least double or triple your money, play FanDuel's props, parlays, and futures. For example, you think DJ Moore is going to score the first touchdown in Sunday's Chicago at Detroit game? That is at plus 1,200. And say you put $10 on that and it hits, you can win $120. Think Chicago can score a touchdown on the first drive for the second straight game? That is at plus 310 the last time I checked. And if that hits, you can at least triple your money. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Everything at their podcasts. This show's available on all major podcast platforms. Also, make sure to turn on those notifications so you can see like when shows are premiering and all that type of stuff on YouTube. And hope you have a good weekend. Hope you have some big plans. Mine, again, I'm probably just going to be, watching some football, that type of stuff. Although I think my wife and daughter want to go see The Sound of Music. Marcus Theaters are playing it around the country, and I think they want to go on Sunday at noon. It's like, but at least I've got my DVR. So, the beauty of now being able to record stuff and live in an on-demand world is excellent. I will say that. Well, MLB.com's Mark Feinsand has reported the Baltimore Orioles had interest in bringing in White Sox assistant GM Josh Barfield to be their general manager. And he turned him down. And one reason I'm sure he probably turned him down is, in the most part, it would just be a promotion in title only. I mean, he would still be in the same role he is in with the White Sox as Mark Elias runs things in Baltimore. And even though the Orioles are, why he still has this job, that is kind of interesting because the Orioles are turning into White Sox 2.0 in terms of declining rebuilds, young talent not working out like you thought it would, the lack of playoff wins from tanking. They're kind of like the, earlier part of this decade's version of the White Sox. And I do hope, though, for the Orioles fans out there, you don't have to experience an historic losing season as a result. But I think this is huge that he's decided to stay at 35th and Shields. First, again, it keeps more adults in the room, as Barfield had success running the Diamondbacks player development before coming over. That was one of the reasons why, we were all like, Jerry Reinsdorf conducting one of the worst GM searches in the history of mankind by just promoting Chris Getz. You kind of got worried, but then Chris Getz starts to bring basically what I'd say more adults in the room and more guys from outside an insular organization tapping into that. So again, you keep a guy that had no ties to you prior to coming. I think second, it does speak to people are starting to believe in the vision that Getz has to turn around things. And you got to give him credit for that because he's basically figured out a way to keep his lieutenants involved and feeling valued. I mean, you've got Will Venable being viewed as his partner basically in constructing this roster. You got Brian Bannister, the pitching director, basically helping Getz make these roster decisions on what pitchers to bring in and then how to develop them. And even though you might be scared because every single ounce of skepticism has been earned for the White Sox, Brian Bannister is considered one of the most forward-thinking pitching minds in the game today. And he's going to have some misses. I mean, it happens to everybody. You got hitting director Ryan Fuller doing the same on the hitting side. And again, look at where he's tapped into. Bannister with the Giants and the Red Sox. Fuller with the Baltimore Orioles, who are known for developing hitting. And you've also seen Getz tap into Barfield's experience to also develop players. I mean, I'm going to go on a limb and make a reach here, but one of the things Getz cited when they sent Colson Montgomery for their Arizona reset, when they pulled him from AAA action to go down to the spring training facility to work with Fuller on his swing, was he cited that Arizona did the exact same thing with some of their struggling star prospects. I wonder, when Getz mentioned Arizona, where he got that from? Was it the guy that was the director of player development that Josh Barfield's previous job was? And while it's not exactly panned out well, it is at least, I've liked it when they've tapped into Barfield's D-backs connections, said D-backs connections, when it comes to maybe salvaging players like Tyler Gilbert. I mean, Tyler Gilbert, there's times where I'm like, why is he still on this team? But there's also times where I'm like, wow, he is a much better guy to go with than some of the ideas that Chris Getz had. Or, going with Dominic Fletcher, even though you shouldn't have traded Christian Manaea, than it was with, say, going with former Royals players that Pedro Grifol seemed to want. And even Chris Getz thought, hey, let's go with these guys. I'm familiar with these guys. I'm sure there was times where Barfield was like, no, let's not do that. And then when it blew up spectacularly, you can see, hey, the White Sox are starting to go with guys that maybe have a little bit more, come from a better pedigree organization, at least at the time. Because remember, the Royals were just as much as a dumpster fire as the White Sox were after their contention window closed. And the only reason why it's reopened was because they made a lot of changes in the offseason of 2024, and they had Bobby Witt Jr. But keeping Barfield around also shows that, hey, here's a guy who doesn't think this franchise is still a sinking ship. Here's a guy who actually thinks he can fix and help an organization that has been an absolute train wreck. And he came here voluntarily, and he's staying here voluntarily. And I wonder if it does make sense, though, at some point, if things keep staying positive, if we keep going on the positive train, that's the biggest thing. Got to stay on the positive train. Do you actually give Getz the promoted title of executive vice president, for example, and you give Barfield the promoted title of GM only because, hear me out here before you're like, hear me out before I say this is another Kenny and Rick situation. What you'd want it to be is more of a situation of kind of like what you see with most front offices that have a president of baseball operations or an executive vice president of baseball operations and a general manager title. It's the general manager is basically the spokesperson for the front office and obviously does some other things, but his main duty is to be the spokesman. Well, the president of baseball ops kind of operates in the background more as being the sole authority because there is so many decisions that have to be made within the organization. And the reason why I'm just floating this is I think Barfield is better spoken than Chris Getz. Now, I think Chris Getz has gotten a little bit better. He's definitely gotten better from I don't like our team, that type of stuff. Or, I think we should win more games. I think he's actually gotten a little bit better at communicating that. But when I listen to Josh Barfield speak, especially on like the Friday night broadcast compared to Chris Getz, I just feel like Barfield is better at explaining things and not prone to saying, I don't like our team type comments. So that's the only thing is, do you want him to be more of the front office spokesman? Whereas, again, I mean, it's not like you don't ever hear from the president of baseball operations, like in the Cubs, like Jed Hoyer still talks. It's just that Carter Hawkins is the one that mostly is the one that's doing the press conferences on like a more weekly basis, or he's the one that's going on 670 Score like every other week, that type of stuff. That's just kind of where I'm going from. That I think just Josh Barfield communicates better, and he might be the better spokesman for the front office. And then you only hear from Chris Getz again when there's major decisions that need to be made. Because, one of the reasons why things became so, just dysfunctional is you never heard any more from Kenny Williams in the previous rebuild. And that's why, Rick Hahn portrayed being the one in charge, but then Kenny then decides once the rebuild is making progress, well, he's going to come back, but he's never going to talk about what he's doing. And then you don't know who is in charge of the White Sox, even though Rick is like, Kenny's my boss. Well, we'd like to hear from your boss while things are falling apart, that type of stuff. In this case, you'd still hear from Chris Getz, but Barfield would be more of the spokesman. That's just an idea. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, until a World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back on Monday with another weekly minor league report. You can leave comments about today's discussion on the community page on YouTube. You can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com, or you can leave them on X, formerly Twitter, at LockedOnSox or at Todd J. Dub. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you Monday.